Welcome back at WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It is a full week of Oriole baseball around here this week. Headed off to Houston, but before they disappeared, they did play some weekend baseball around here in March, no less. Luke Jones was down at Oriole Park at Camden Yards all weekend long, monitoring all things going on with the Birds. And, you know, beyond the Adam Jones home run, boy, not a whole lot to love about the first weekend of baseball here. And certainly on Saturday, almost no hit. On Sunday, kind of run out of the gym early. Pitching hasn't been there. Offense hasn't been there. But they'll get better going to visit in the World Champs, where they're going to hand out rings in Houston this week. Right, Luke?
I found it funny that you used the term disappear, because I was going to ask, well, when did the bats appear, actually, other than Adam Jones and I guess Caleb Joseph with the triple on opening day. But I want to remind everyone, before we get into everything that happened, and look, it was an ugly weekend. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but whatever your expectations were going into the season, nothing should change after 3 games. Or frankly, you prove your expectations didn't mean much, and you don't really get how baseball works. I mean, sure, you can be concerned from the standpoint of they lost 2 out of 3, and they didn't look good, but it was 3 games. So I just want to throw that disclaimer out. We all do this, and look, we're going to react to it because guys like you and me talk about it for a living. We cover it. We're not going to say something's fine if it didn't look so good, but at the same time, we all need to acknowledge this thing needs to breathe a little while. But as you mentioned, and this is why you really would have liked to have won on Sunday to at least get a series win, going to Houston and then going to the Bronx for 4 after that, it's going to be a tough week. And we've talked about this even before the season started, what kind of schedule the Orioles were dealing with early on. So that was going to be a challenge, whether the Orioles lost 2 out of 3 to Minnesota, whether they swept them, whatever might have happened, that was going to be a challenge. But sure, you look back on what happened beyond the good feeling of opening day, not a whole lot to like over the weekend. And probably the most sobering debate is what was worse, the starting pitching or the offense. And the answer might just be yes, because both were absolutely abysmal, specifically on Saturday and Sunday.
I would say the hitting's worse. You know, I mean, I saw bad pitching last year. And before I even get to the hitting or the pitching, the obvious takeaway for me over the weekend is the defense has gone off the cliff from where it was in 13, 14. I mean, as the team got good, when Buck got here, the defense was the one part of the team where you're like, well, they do catch the ball when it's hit to them. I mean, that was sort of the first thing that ever got better around here after the 15 years of darkness that we don't talk about around here. It wasn't the bats that were incredible. It wasn't the home runs that were incredible. It wasn't the pitching that was incredible. The defense was the first thing that came, I think. And I don't want to say it was the first thing to leave, because clearly the pitching was the first thing to leave as this team started to turn over the last, let's say, 24 months. But the defense, I don't know that that's going to have a good day. There'll be days where Bundy pitches. There'll be days where, you know, I guess Cashner will be representative. And, you know, I guess at some point we'll see Gosman straighten out and have some good starts. But the defense, I don't know. I don't know, Luke. I look at this team and say that they're probably not going to play a great brand of defense like we came to expect 3-4 years ago.
I mean, did you feel that way before the season started? I mean, Look, they had a couple things go, you know, sideways here and there, but I don't know if I can make that determination 3 games into it. I mean, I don't know if I can say Tim Beckham can't play third base. I mean, he's had 3 games. I don't know if I can say Manny Machado at shortstop isn't going to work out.
I'm saying it's not going to be as good as Hardy in his prime and Machado in his prime and Markakis in his prime and Wieters behind the plate looking like Johnny Bench and Chris Davis looking like a really good first baseman.
Okay.
I mean, it's not going to be that kind of team. And I think they're going to kick it around more than we're accustomed to them kicking it around. That's all.
Okay, I guess I was just asking specifically what you were so concerned about. I mean, because, you know, you hadn't really mentioned – I mean, look, I'm not.
But we don't talk about defense in February. We talk about it when Chris Davis is kicking the ball around, and when Beckham. That's when we talk about it.
Remember what I said? We have to let the season breathe. Look, we can talk about what happened, but to make these widespread disclaimers already, then what were we talking about the last 3 months? I mean, my point is, I mean,
we were talking about beer league softball and 2 starting pitchers 4 weeks ago. Now we're talking about beer league softball and 4 starting pitchers and maybe raised expectations. Luke, I spent 4.5 months around here thinking they're probably going to win 72 to 75 games, which makes them irrelevant. Now I think they could win 82 or 85, which makes me much more interested in all the little aspects of how you win and lose games. And kicking the ball around is one of the ways you lose games that when you win 72, 75 games, you don't notice it. When you start to get some decent pitching and you can win some games, then you can't kick the ball around.
Fair enough. Okay. I understand that. I mean, I guess I didn't see them making 5-6 errors a game over the weekend where I'm like, that's my biggest takeaway. Sure, there are questions. I mean, I have questions about Tim Beckham. I have a lot of questions about Chance Sisco. I mean, so many people are clamoring for him to be the starting catcher, and they want to cast Caleb Joseph aside because of what happened 2 years ago. Chance Sisco's got to prove that he can play defense at the major league level and handle a pitching staff. I think the outfield is... I wouldn't say it's better necessarily than it's been the last couple of years. I don't think it's worse from a standpoint of, going back the last 3 years where the outfield defense on the corners has been lacking. Mancini's fine in left. I think Rasmus can be pretty good in right field based on his track record. There are questions. I mean, don't get me wrong. At the same time, just because Chris Davis boots a couple balls, all I've heard the last year or two, people that want to defend him, is they love his defense so much. So that's just gone after 2 games. I don't know. I mean, right now, the defense isn't the thing that I'm concerned about.
Fair enough.
Compared to some of the other issues. And look, you might be completely right. I just can't look at this and say that I think the defense is going to be a colossal problem after 2 or 3 games. I need to see it a little bit more. I need to see how Machado looks at shortstop. I need to see what Beckham looks like. Like I said, nothing about this weekend was really good, but I can't just point to the defense first and foremost. Obviously they're going to hit better than what they hit over the weekend. I mean, you're talking about a team that was in the low 100s over these 3 games. The starting pitching, Bundy looked really good. Cashner and Gausman didn't look good. So, I mean, those are the bigger issues at work here. And the defense, I need to see that evolve here over the next couple weeks. A week from now, if we're talking about them playing some lousy defense against the Astros and the Yankees, then, yeah, I'm totally on board then. But, again...
Well, Gentry went over the wall on opening day, or they would have lost in regulation, right?
Sure, yeah, I mean...
To some degree, right?
Well, I can't remember. Was anyone on base for that? But anyway, my point is, and this goes back to what I said, I love this time of year because baseball is back, but if the Orioles have this series in June and they're 6 games over 500 at the time, we're not starting to just say, oh, they're completely doomed or anything like that. But clearly they need to play better in every phase of the game. I mean, that was not... Saturday and Sunday was very September-esque, talking what we saw last year from this team, where they entered the month of September still mathematically very much in the wild card race, and they completely fell apart. So that's where there's a little more concern. I think any concerns that we had going into the season, and like I said, I mean, the defense was somewhere on that spectrum. I'm not sure anything you take away from the weekend that wasn't already a concern is now suddenly this newfound concern. Again, let it breathe a little bit, but certainly there wasn't a whole lot to like about the weekend. That's for sure.
Look, and we didn't talk about him catching the ball in the offseason because we were so concerned about the pitching, and the offense has been so picture, sort of stagnant and what they are, and you look up opening week, and Pedro Alvarez is on the team, and you're thinking they didn't even want him on the team last year. How did he get on the team this year? And I guess all of this is based on need and injury and Trumbo and where they are, but not being able to hit the ball over the weekend against the Twins was demoralizing a little bit, I think, from the opening of the season standpoint, where you already know the pitching is going to be of some concern. And the Cashner thing, I think, was a setback psychologically, because I think we believe, and I know you were pumping the brakes on that from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
The whole 3.40 ERA, and he's going to be better here than he was in Texas is all, bunk. I had Barry Bloom on last week and watched him pitch out in San Diego for a number of years, and, didn't particularly care for the signing, but beggars can't be choosers when you're signing pitchers in March.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the funny thing about how Cashner pitched on Saturday, what was the big thing we were talking about? The strikeout rate that fell off a cliff last year, wasn't missing bats. Well, he struck out 5 batters and actually missed some bats. I mean, now I'm not saying that made it a good outing, but what we were concerned about with Cashner was actually something that one of the few things he did okay on Saturday. He gave up the long ball. Gave up 15 all last year, and he gives up 3 on Saturday night. But even there, and there's a perfect example, I didn't love the Andrew Cashner signing. I liked it better after they added Alex Cobb. And keep in mind, Alex Cobb is obviously going to be a big part of this rotation, if not the best pitcher they have, or at least 1 and 1A with Bundy. I mean, that was kind of the thought when they signed him. But even there, again, it's one start. I can't be over the top in my concern. But from a psychological standpoint, yeah, there's certainly something to the fact that you had Bundy going in the opener. He pitched extremely well. And then the other 2 guys don't do their job. And that was very first half of last year like. I mean, that's kind of how the first half was last year. I mean, Gausman was horrible. Certainly Tillman was awful. Jimenez was awful. Miley had a few decent starts here and there, but again, it was smoke and mirrors, and everything about it just looked bad other than, okay, he was only giving up maybe 2 runs over 5 innings. So that part of it definitely, you look at it and say, needs to be a lot better than this. But going back to the offense, it's very simple for this team. And look, even if they have marked improvement, this is not going to be a rotation that's top 5 in the American League. I think we all would agree with that. And that's even assuming that Bundy is, at the very least, what he was last year. And that's even assuming that Gausman follows a similar pattern and is better in the second half of the season than he was in the first. And that's even counting on Cashner to be solid at the very least. You bring Cobb in, yeah, they'll be better if those things happen, but they're not going to be a top 3 rotation in the league. What does that mean? They need to hit. I mean, you can't have a 3-game series where you hit, what was it? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 117, I think.
Dude, I'm watching the Final Four on Saturday night. You're sending out, no-hitter alerts, on the text service.
Right.
I mean, that's unacceptable. Day 2. It sort of harkens back to the days of Hideo Nomo, right?
Right. I mean, you give up.
And Juan Nieves, that was also an April no-hitter. That was the one that I saw the end of. Not the beginning, but the end of that one.
Yeah,
so,
Eddie Murray hitting the line drive into right center.
Dude, let's be honest here. I mean, forget this lousy baseball team right now. You almost saw a no-hitter on Saturday night. You were rooting for it, right?
No, I wasn't. But,
no?
And here's why. It's a combined no-hitter.
It was one of those Flanagan, Williamson, Olsen specials, one of those.
You can even go back on our timeline at WNST on Twitter. It's such a meh thing to happen. Look, if it happens, it's a heck of an accomplishment for the Twins. Don't get me wrong.
I've been waiting my whole life. I've been waiting a half a century, Luke, to see a no-hitter. Don't PP on a no-hitter. I've walked out of one and I've walked into one, but I've never attended one.
No one ever says, I remember being there for that no-hitter that 3 guys combined to pitch. I mean,
Bob Milacki was involved in that one, I think. I hadn't even Googled that.
And no one really thinks of it as legit. I mean, it's just...
It's not like when Joan Jett tells her Jim Palmer stories.
And by the way, I'm glad you brought this up. Everyone overlooks what happened on Sunday if Eddie Rosario doesn't misplay the Chance Sisco fly to the wall in the 3rd inning. And look, we know the butterfly effect, and just, if that changed, then everything else after that might have changed. But let's just assume that he makes that catch and everything else goes the same. Jose Barrios has a perfect game into the 9th inning. I mean, just think about that. I mean, we're talking about what happened Saturday night, and look, Kyle Gibson, 6 no-hit innings. He walked 5 guys. I mean, it was a good outing and impressive, and not trying to completely be dismissive of the possibility of a no-hitter, but I was much more impressed with what Barrios was doing on Sunday. And when you think about that, I mean, Rosario absolutely should have caught that ball at the wall. I mean, any good left fielder needs to make that catch. I mean, there was nothing that terribly difficult about it. But going back to your no-hitter point, it's just it's such a meh kind of a reaction when it's multiple guys compared to one guy. If it's one guy, I'm totally with you.
Well, I would have bought you a beer just for being there, and I felt good that you had a chance, and not great that the Orioles had a chance to, have the indignity of all of it. But at some point, I'd like for you to see a no-hitter. At some point, I'd like for me to see a no-hitter. And I don't go to enough baseball games anymore to, really make it. I just feel like that's going to be the story of my life, that I refused to go to Hideo Nomo with my son, that I turned down Scotty P that afternoon that David Cohn threw the no-hitter at Yankee Stadium, that I walked out of the Bud Smith no-hitter in San Diego back in 2001, and that I walked into the Nieves no-hitter in the 7th inning because it was the 6th inning and I got in my car over on Kane Street. And I was in the locker room for that one. I had a microphone in front of Juan Nieves, but it wasn't a real no-hitter because I wasn't there for the whole thing. Really, I didn't walk in and walk out. There was a no-hitter into the 7th or the 8th. I think it was on Easter, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago.
Jason Hamill, his very first start with the Orioles.
I was at that game. I watched it, and in the 8th inning, I left with my son and my wife. After the hit was given up, on the way out, I was berated by a very religious Easter person behind home plate. Something about F-bombs and my mother and the Orioles and Peter Angelos. It was a lovely Easter afternoon, but that was as close as I've come sitting in the seats to thinking, well, today this could happen. Really it could happen.
Yeah. And look, let me be clear. I wasn't openly rooting against it. It was just one of those things where, all right, if this happens, I still don't feel like it's the legitimate.
Oh, come on, don't torture yourself. A no-hitter's a no-hitter, man. I mean, come on. What the hell's wrong with you?
Well, you have to remember, I saw something far more rare than a no-hitter. I saw Josh Hamilton's 4-home run game against the Orioles. That was, you look at the list of those, that's more in line with, that's about as rare as a perfect game. Actually.
That's right up there with your with Tuffy Rhodes or whatever his name was, right?
Yeah. So, and again, I'm not saying I was rooting against it by any stretch of the imagination from a baseball fan standpoint. But again, a combined no hitter. I mean, and I know we remember the one the Orioles had in '91 in Oakland, but I mean, you really think about it. What was the last true no hitter the Orioles had? It was Palmer in '69. I mean, it's just the way it is. I mean, we don't recognize combined no-hitters in the historic manner that we do.
Well, Nestor does. I mean, you put yourself in your own category.
Right.
But if I had been at the Flanagan, Malacky, Williamson, was it Froworth? I don't even know, Olsen, whoever the hell it was, I would still be telling stories about it, and I would have the ticket frame behind me.
Fair enough. And I guess maybe
you're being too hard on yourself here, When the Orioles get no hit, I want you to be there.
Yeah, you hope they're on the winning end.
I don't want it to be in the middle of the night in Arizona or something.
Yeah. It's just when they were no hit by Iwakuma a few years ago. That was in Seattle. That was like a Thursday afternoon game or something like that. But
I forgot all about that. You had to bring that up, didn't you?
Yeah. That was 15, I believe it was.
Well, I was pulling for you into the night Saturday night, and I thought, this would be a great way to thud to start the season. They'll get no hit on the second day by 6 different pitchers and walk 7 times in the game. Luke Jones is our guest. It's all brought to you by our friends at Howard Bank. And, of course, they're sponsoring our charity and community series that begins on Thursday. You'll definitely want to check that out on Thursday mornings. Van Brook's going to be joining us, as well as we're going to have the Casey Cares Foundation on to kick things off here this week. It's also brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing. Billy Cole will be here a little later on in the week to give his observations on the sports world. One of my favorite foils and friends to go to games with. You can find Luke at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. Make sure you're downloading the Royal Farms app, and you're using that when you're gassing up. You'll get some free fried chicken, some free Western fries. I picked up a pint of Ben & Jerry's last week. I'm not going to lie. There's a Royal Farms 2 blocks that way. There's a Royal Farms 6 blocks that way. I'm always at a Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast, and gassing up with the Kona blend right here in my Cole Roofing mug. Luke, any thoughts about the Houston Astros as we make the effort down there? We're not going to see much of the Twins. The Astros, obviously, same story, but going in there where they're handing out rings, they're celebrating opening day, they're celebrating becoming even a better team, at least theoretically here in the offseason. This is a rough week for Orioles baseball in Houston and New York.
Oh, there's no question about it. And as much as I was basically pumping the brakes as far as the panic over what happened against the Twins and what was an ugly series, there's no doubt about that. This is where the concern, you didn't have to see how the Orioles played on Saturday and Sunday to be concerned about this road trip. I mean, you go to the defending world champions. They're going to be raising the World Series banner. They're going to be getting their rings over the course of the series. And, oh, yeah, Chris Tillman and Mike Wright are pitching the first two games of the series against Charlie Morton and Justin Verlander. So, needless to say, that looks like a daunting challenge. And looking at this one on paper, you're really fearful of this thing going really sideways early on, and the Orioles coming home and they're somewhere in the neighborhood of 2-8 or something like that. I mean, you just don't want to have that kind of a road trip. But when you're facing Houston, we saw what happened to the Orioles playing at Yankee Stadium last year specifically, and now you throw Giancarlo Stanton into the mix. This is certainly one of those weeks where you better buckle up and you better brace yourself a little bit, and you hope, pray, demand, whatever you want to do, that the bats show up as they travel now. Because they certainly didn't show up in Baltimore over the weekend. But, I mean, this Astros team, it's pretty amazing when you think about it. They're the defending world champs. They were an ascending team before they won the World Series. All this young talent, all these players, that all-star caliber players, and just go down the list, lineup, starting rotation, bullpen maybe not. What you look at is their biggest calling card, but certainly good enough.
But a whole different level of expectation this year. Now.
Oh, no doubt. And they got better. I mean, how many times can you talk about a World Series team on paper getting better? But now you look at what they've added to their starting rotation, and it's just, it's really incredible to think about it. I mean, when you add Garrett Cole to the mix after you added Justin Verlander down the stretch last year, and you already had Dallas Keuchel, and you already had Charlie Morton, who was so good for them, and McCullers. I mean, guys that were just absolutely lights out in the postseason. And now, I mean, you look at it, everyone's a year older. But when you're talking about young players like Springer and Altuve and Correa and Bregman, and I mean, just go down the list of all these different guys. They have a couple veterans sprinkled in there. We understand that, but all of those young players, when you say a year older, that's a good thing. When you're talking about teams that have guys on the wrong side of 30 and they're a year older, you're starting to wonder if they're going to hold on. But, I mean, this Astros team, they've won 3 of their first 4. That's not a surprise. I really have a tough time seeing anyone in that division seriously challenging them. I mean, I just think they're that good, and it's going to be a major challenge for the Orioles. I mean, this is one of those series that you go into every series wanting to win it, but this is one of those series where you kind of feel like, well, just don't go and get swept and strike out 50 times like they did a couple years ago when they were in Houston and losing 10-1 every night. But on paper, you look at the pitching matchups. First 2, needless to say, don't look advantageous whatsoever. And then you get to the finale, Bundy pitching, but he's facing Dallas Keuchel, so not exactly a given there.
That's the game you want the tickets for, right? That's the one you want to get the popcorn for.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is in Kershaw Bumgarner territory, but it's pretty darn good, and especially Bundy coming off of how he pitched on opening day. And I did find it interesting that the Orioles had the off day, but they decided to give Bundy the extra day and not move him up and skip Mike Wright, which Wright would have been pitching right after that anyway. But I did find that at least mildly interesting. But
giving an extra day of rest this time of year, maybe. I mean, I'll hear that.
And the other thing, and we've talked about this over and over, I am never going to. I'll fault the Orioles on a lot of things that they mishandle or don't have forward thinking. I will never question them trying to do something like that for Dylan Bundy when you consider what his workload has been the last couple years, how he basically came out of nowhere after missing so much time in the minor leagues to become a member of this rotation. I mean, one half of baseball, and he was in the rotation. I won't fault them for giving him an extra day, but boy, with not having Alex Cobb ready to go yet, and you're throwing Mike Wright out there against the Astros, that's
against Verlander, no less.
That is
on the night when they're handing the rings out, by the way.
I mean, that is.
Here you go, Mike. Take the ball Tuesday night. Go get him.
We talked about some of those reverse lock scenarios last year with Ubaldo. This one's right up there. I mean, you might not find a more reverse lock scenario than that one, which means the Orioles will probably knock Verlander around for 6 runs and they'll win 10-1, right?
Or they'll lose 9-7 or something like that. Through it all. Luke Jones is here. He is Luke at WNST.net as well as Baltimore Luke. We're going to be talking Orioles baseball each and every day and I love the way you and I discuss baseball because especially the last 4 years since I've come back on to doing this, we don't really jump off a bridge any night, and certainly it's been a good brand of Oriole baseball, but the lack of offense against that pitching, and looking down now over the next week. You ready? Morton, okay, fair enough. Verlander, Keuchel, Tanaka, Sabathia, Gray, Montgomery, and then Happ, week out on that. So that would be Bundy and Happ, by the way, next week if it all holds up and if the weather holds up. They're not going to have any rainouts down at Houston, but certainly who knows what the Yankee Stadium is going to look like over the weekend. But welcome to the American League. Welcome to the teams that are going to win 90 games and why they're going to win 90 games, because they don't come in with Mike Wright starting for them. Yeah,
that's fair. Hey, and granted, the Orioles are playing a man down in their rotation, but they could have signed Alex Cobb sooner than they did from that standpoint.
Could have given him $90 million instead of $53.
Yeah.
By the way, I saw the number on that. It's $57 million, but $53 in real value, right?
Yeah,
there's two numbers now because the Orioles defer money, unlike a lot of other teams.
Yeah, and look, I mean, if guys are willing to accept it, I mean, I don't have a major problem with it. I mean, they deferred money back in the 90s, if you remember. I mean, some of
Bobby Bonilla is still getting paid.
Yeah. I mean, that aside, and look, I like the signing. I was more tongue-in-cheek in saying that as much as anything else, but it looks like Cobb maybe April 14th. They want him to have a couple more outings where they want to build up to 5 innings and then 6 innings, and then they're hoping the 14th he's ready to go. That's not exactly stunning. If you look at Jake Arrieta's profile with the Phillies, and he signed, I believe, 10 days earlier, and he wasn't ready to go for the start of the season. But in the meantime, someone's got to take up that occupy that 5th spot, probably the best way to put it. And Mike Wright will at least get the ball the first time around. But there's no doubt about this. I mean, the Orioles, we talked about this the 3rd week of spring training. We probably mentioned this at some point over the winter as we were taking a long-term kind of peek at the schedule. This first 3 weeks is a bear. It's really a time where I don't expect them to thrive, but you need to, at the very least, tread some water here and not really put yourself in a hole. When you talk about these first 20 games, 14 of them being on the road, if you're 9-11, that's fine. I mean, it's not great. It's not something that you're happy about, but you're still very much in fine position to be a good baseball team.
But you can't wake up 5-14 3 weeks from now, right?
You can't be coming home after that second road trip. They'll come home and play Toronto, and then they go right back on the road. You can't come home at that point and be 6-14. You can't be 5-15, or you've really maybe not buried yourself mathematically, but you've taken away your margin for error the rest of the way. Even to be in that wild card race, it just becomes very, very difficult. So you got to figure out a way to win. At least you got to win some games. At least, I mean, even if you're not winning these series consistently, you can't go to Yankee Stadium and get swept. You can't get swept in Houston. You got to figure out a way to win a few of these games. And if the bats come alive and Cashner bounces back and Gausman bounces back, which those aren't unheard of things to happen. I mean, I'm not talking about a million and one in a million proposition. So you just got to play a lot better. I mean, you can't hit 117 over a 3-game series and expect to win. I mean, that's just stating the obvious. I mean, the Twins are a pretty good team. They were pretty good last year. I'm guessing they'll be pretty good this year. But when you bat 117 and you give up 13 runs over the final 2 games, you're going to get beat. You don't have to be Abner Doubleday to figure that out. So it really is a pretty simple concept going on the road. They have to play much, much better. And yes, I will even agree with you. The defense needs to be better as well. But when you're not scoring any runs and your starting pitchers are getting knocked around in the first 3-4 innings, it feels like some of those really bad stretches last year where the bats would fall silent and the starting pitching. Kevin Gausman put you in a 4-0 hole in the first inning. Needless to say, it's an uphill climb after that, especially when you're facing a good young pitcher like Barrios.
All right, you can find him out at WNST.net all week long, whether it's in Houston, in New York. We're following the Orioles, covering the Orioles, getting ready for the Caps playoffs, getting you ready for the NFL draft. The NFL schedule's coming out in a couple of weeks. We've got our trip with Ray Lewis to Canton, Ohio, a little baseball mixed in there with Pittsburgh as well as Cleveland. You can get all those details on the Road Trips tab at WNST.net. The BuyAToyota.com audio vault is there for you 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world to listen to anything we're talking about this week, including Masters coverage, the coverage of a new national champion here in basketball, as well as getting ready for NBA and NHL playoffs next week. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Our morning newspaper delivers directly to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And don't forget the race entries now for Laurel in the morning newspaper every morning, as well as on the front of WNST.net. Last but never least, any breaking news. If the Orioles make a deal, if the Ravens make a deal, if anybody makes a deal, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. I will be joining Dennis on Thursday, getting you ready for the weekend. It is the SSV on WNST. That's heard from 3 until 5 on Thursdays with Dennis Colatzos. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.